Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast, and welcome to today's deep dive.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here to talk about this.
Yeah, we are thrilled to have you. Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of, absolute precision.
Oh, absolutely. It feels very mechanical, right?
Right. It feels exactly like engineering.
Yeah.
Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the film and says, there is the problem, and here is how we fix it.
Yeah, it's very binary.
Exactly. It's binary. You are either broken or not broken. You're sick or you're healthy.
And, it is deeply comforting to view the body as a machine like that. We really prefer our medical problems to be visible.
Totally.
We want them to be neatly categorized, and most importantly, we want them to have a clear, actionable solution attached to them.
But then you step into the world of end-of-life care, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just completely useless.
It really is. The whole paradigm shifts.
It does. We're looking at a landscape that is, honestly, incredibly murky for most of us. It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Because we aren't talking about fixing a singular, localized problem anymore.
Right, exactly. We are talking about an entire human transition. And for you, the listener, someone who, loves to be well-informed and thoroughly prepared for life's inevitable complexities, today's topic is probably going to carry some heavy emotional weight.
It's a heavy topic, for sure.
It is, but it's profoundly necessary. Today, we are demystifying the end-of-life process and unpacking the exact structure of hospice care.
Because it really remains a topic shrouded in just an immense amount of unnecessary mystery.
Oh, completely.
And where there is mystery in medicine, there is inevitably fear. I mean, when people don't understand the mechanisms of what is happening to a human body, they fill that void of knowledge with worst-case scenarios.
They absolutely panic.
Right, the panic just takes over.
Well, our mission for this deep dive is to entirely remove that fear. We are going to strip away the taboo and all that uncertainty that surrounds end-of-life care.
Which is so important for families navigating this.
Exactly. We want to provide you with a clear, comforting roadmap of the physical, emotional, and logistical journey.
And we have some really great foundational materials to help us do that today.
We do. We're utilizing a foundational essay guiding us today titled, When Someone Dies in Hospice Care, A Gentle Transition Explained, alongside some really comprehensive resources regarding post-life tributes from the funeral program site.
Both are just excellent resources for understanding this whole spectrum.
So, all right. Let's unpack this, because before we can talk about the end of the journey, we need to precisely define the parameters of the care itself.
Right. The terminology can be really confusing for people.
It really is. I think a lot of people conflate terms like, curative care, palliative care, and hospice.
All the time.
They use them interchangeably, but they represent entirely different medical philosophies, don't they?
They absolutely do. Clarifying those boundaries is really the essential first step here. So, curative care is the medical model we are all most familiar with.
The standard hospital visit, basically.
Exactly. The sole objective is the eradication of the disease or the reversal of the condition. If you have an infection, curative care administers antibiotics to kill the bacteria.
Purely focused on the fix.
Right. But then palliative care is a subtle shift. It's specialized medical care focused on providing relief from the symptoms and the stress of a serious illness.
But you can get palliative care while still trying to cure the illness, right?
Yes, that's the key distinction. You can receive palliative care at any stage of an illness, entirely concurrently with curative treatments.
Okay, so like an example of that would be what?
Well, you might be undergoing really aggressive chemotherapy to try and cure a cancer while simultaneously receiving palliative care to manage the severe nausea and the pain from that chemo.
Ah, I see. Which brings us to hospice. Where does that line actually get drawn?
So, hospice care is a specific subset of palliative care, but it is defined by a distinct transition in the overarching goal.
A transition in the goal itself.
Yes. Hospice begins when a patient's medical team determines that the underlying illness is just no longer responding to curative attempts.
And there's a timeline associated with that, generally.
Typically, yes. It's when the patient has a life expectancy of 6 months or less, assuming the disease runs its natural course.
And at that exact point, curative treatment is officially stopped.
Correct. The focus pivots entirely and exclusively to maximizing the quality of the time remaining.
The best way I can visualize that shift in perspective is with an analogy.
I love a good analogy. Let's hear it.
So, if traditional curative medicine is like fighting a relentless storm at sea, like you are bailing water, you're patching holes in the hull, you are desperately fighting the crashing waves to keep the vessel moving forward at all costs.
Right, it's a battle.
Exactly, it's exhausting. But hospice care is fundamentally different. Hospice care is about recognizing the sheer scale of the storm, stopping the exhausting, painful fight against the impossible waves, and expertly navigating the ship into a quiet, safe harbor.
That is a beautiful way to frame it.
The goal inherently changes. It goes from, winning the fight to achieving peace.
And that framing is vital because knowledge really is a shield against fear.
Oh, 100%.
When you are caught in that storm you described, the sheer panic comes from not knowing what the next wave will do. You don't know if the hull will hold.
You're just reacting in terror.
Exactly.
Right.
But by understanding the exact mechanics of this gentle transition into the harbor, families can actually reclaim these final moments.
They take the power back.
Yes, they can transform them from a time of rushing around, of frantic medical interventions, and of clinical chaos into a time of profound presence.
Because they know what to expect.
Right. Knowing the steps of the journey allows you to simply be there with your loved one rather than trying to manage a constant medical crisis.
To really understand this transition, though, we have to look closely at the people who actually facilitate it.
The care team.
Yeah, the care team. The source material emphasizes that the primary mandate of hospice, this pivot to comfort and dignity, is executed by a very specific, comprehensive, multidisciplinary team.
It's a very robust group of professionals.
We're talking about nurses, doctors, social workers, and chaplains. But I have to push back on the structure a bit.
Okay, what's your concern?
Well, when you go to the hospital for a surgery or severe illness, your team is strictly clinical. You see a doctor, you see a nurse, maybe a specialist.
Very streamlined.
Highly streamlined. So why the sudden introduction of social workers and chaplains into the standard medical mix at the end of life?
It does seem like a leap if you're used to the standard model.
I mean, I can easily see how a chaplain walking into my mother's bedroom would absolutely terrify me. It feels like a massive, flashing neon sign that says, "We are giving up, prepare for the end."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the history of how this care model was developed in the first place.
Okay, where did it come from?
We have to look at the work of Dame Cicely Saunders in the 1960s. She is widely considered the founder of the modern hospice movement.
Oh, fascinating. What was her approach?
Well, Saunders introduced a revolutionary concept to medicine called total pain.
Total pain.
Yes. She argued that when a person is dying, the suffering they experience is not exclusively physical. It is an intricate web of physical pain, emotional trauma, social disruption, and spiritual distress.
Wow. So treating just the biology is essentially treating only, 25% of the actual problem?
Precisely. In traditional curative medicine, the focus is hyper-localized on the failing organ or the spreading infection.
Fix the lung, fix the kidney.
Right. But death is fundamentally a social, logistical, and existential event. It affects everything.
That makes a lot of sense.
Let's look at the social worker's role in this context. In a traditional hospital, a social worker might just, coordinate your physical therapy upon discharge.
Basically just a discharge planner.
Exactly. But in hospice, the social worker is managing incredibly complex family dynamics that are being entirely warped by acute grief.
Because grief changes people.
It does. They are managing the crushing administrative burdens, the sudden financial anxieties, the practical realities of a household losing a core member.
They're answering the really hard, practical questions.
Yes, they are the ones helping the family answer the terrifying question of, how do we practically survive this loss?
Which leaves the chaplain to handle the existential piece of that total pain concept.
The spiritual distress, yes.
But again, for someone who isn't traditionally religious, isn't that an intrusion?
That is a very, very common apprehension, but it fundamentally misunderstands the role of a modern clinical chaplain.
Oh, really? How so?
The chaplain is not there to enforce a specific religious doctrine or to act as the Grim Reaper's herald, like you mentioned earlier.
That's a relief.
In the hospice framework, the chaplain is there to address existential weight. When human beings face the end of their lives, they grapple with the ultimate why.
Like, why is this happening to me?
Exactly. Why is this happening? What did my life actually mean? How do I find peace with the fractured relationships I am leaving behind?
Heavy, heavy question.
Incredibly heavy. And the chaplain provides a safe, non-judgmental space to process that spiritual distress. They offer prayer if it is explicitly requested, but often, as our source notes, they simply offer a highly trained, empathetic listening ear.
It is like building a custom-designed safety net for a very specific type of freefall.
That's a great way to put it.
And for you listening, understanding this team structure is just crucial. Knowing this team exists means you do not have to carry the emotional, spiritual, and logistical burdens alone.
You really don't.
If you find yourself navigating this with a parent, a partner, or a friend, there is an infrastructure already built to catch you.
You don't have to be everything for everyone.
Exactly. You do not have to suddenly become an amateur pharmacologist, a family therapist, and an existential philosopher, all while you are actively grieving.
The multidisciplinary team is there to do the heavy lifting, so you can simply return to being the daughter, the husband, or the friend.
That transition of roles, allowing the family to stop being exhausted caregivers and crisis managers, is really the core gift of hospice.
It's the most profound gift they offer.
But to fully embrace that gift, we have to talk about what is actually happening physiologically.
The biology of it.
Yeah, because even with the most supportive team in the world, the physical reality of the body shutting down can be intensely intimidating if you do not understand the science behind what you are looking at.
It can be terrifying to watch.
Which takes us into arguably the most misunderstood and frankly the most feared part of the process, demystifying the final hours.
This is where the education piece becomes critical.
Right. Now that we know who is guiding the ship, we need to look at the actual physical journey of those final days.
What the body's actually doing.
The source material highlights specific physical changes as death approaches. It mentions decreased appetite, increased sleep, and distinct changes in breathing patterns.
The classic physiological signs.
The best ELI-5 way I can visualize this natural shutdown process is to compare the human body to a massive, beautifully lit house.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
When you are fully alive and healthy, every room is blazing with light, the HVAC is running, the appliances are humming, the music is playing.
Everything is powered up.
Everything. But as the body prepares for this transition, it starts to systematically conserve power. It turns off the lights, room by room. It shuts down the guest room, then the hallways, then the kitchen.
Saving energy.
Exactly. It doesn't need the massive energy required to digest a heavy meal anymore, so the appetite turns off. It doesn't need to stay awake and process complex sensory input, so sleep increases.
It's a completely natural powering down sequence.
It is. But if you are standing inside that house and you don't know the master switch is intentionally being dialed down, it looks like a catastrophic power failure that you need to frantically fix.
The house analogy is a brilliant starting point because it really captures the frantic instinct of the surviving family members.
You just want to fix it.
The immediate human instinct is to run around trying to screw the light bulbs back in. They want to force feed their loved one because, well, in our society, providing food equates to providing love and sustaining a life.
Food is care.
Exactly. And they panic at the sound of the breathing changing. But we need to elevate this beyond the analogy and look at what is actually tripping those physiological breakers.
Okay, let's get into the biology of that. What does that actually mean for the patient lying in the bed?
Mechanically speaking, we are looking at a fundamental shift in cellular metabolism.
Shifting.
It means the body is actively prioritizing survival of the most critical functions. As the disease progresses, the heart's pumping efficiency often decreases, and cellular energy production, the creation of ATP, slows down.
So there's just less energy to go around.
Precisely. The body intelligently begins shunting blood flow away from the extremities, the hands, the feet, the digestive tract, and redirects it to the core, primarily the brain and the heart.
Oh, wow. So this is why you see the hands and feet become cool to the touch.
Yes, or they might take on a mottled purplish appearance.
And that shunting of blood explains the total loss of appetite.
Exactly. The gastrointestinal tract requires a massive amount of blood flow and energy to break down and process food.
It's a heavy energy lift.
Huge. When the body is powering down, it actively recognizes that digesting a meal is a waste of its rapidly depleting energy reserves. The digestive system essentially goes dormant.
So trying to feed them is actually a bad idea.
This is why forcing a dying patient to eat or drink is actually counterproductive and can cause profound discomfort.
Because the stomach literally can't handle it.
Right. It cannot process the food, leading to severe bloating, nausea, and a really high risk of aspiration, which is breathing the food into the lungs.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It is. The loss of appetite is not the body starving. It is the body protecting itself from a task it can no longer perform.
That makes complete logical sense when you explain the mechanics of it. But what about the breathing?
The breathing is usually the hardest part for families.
Yeah, that seems to be the symptom that causes the most acute terror. The source material mentions distinct changes in breathing patterns. What exactly are we looking at there?
There are usually two primary respiratory changes that cause immense anxiety. The first is called Cheyne-Stokes respiration.
Cheyne-Stokes. Okay, what does that look like?
This is a pattern where the patient's breathing becomes progressively deeper and faster, followed by a gradual decrease that results in a temporary stop in breathing altogether.
They just stop breathing.
Yes, an apnea phase that can last for 10, 20, sometimes up to 60 seconds
Okay.
before the cycle starts again.
A 60-second pause in breathing would feel like an absolute eternity if you are sitting by the bedside holding their hand.
It feels like an eternity. I mean, you're just watching the clock. But physiologically, it is just the brainstem's respiratory center losing its fine-tuned sensitivity to carbon dioxide levels in the blood.
So it's a software glitch, basically.
Sort of, yes.
Mm.
It is a neurological resetting, not a sign that the patient is suffocating or in pain.
That's a huge relief to know.
The second major change is often referred to clinically as terminal secretions, or colloquially, the death rattle.
Oh man, just the name of that alone is horrifying.
It is a terrible name for a very natural process.
What's actually causing that sound?
As the patient slips into a deeper state of unconsciousness, they lose their natural swallow reflex. We all constantly produce saliva and mucus in our throats, right?
Yeah.
And we subconsciously swallow it thousands of times a day. When that reflex stops, those normal secretions pool in the back of the throat. When the air passes over that small pool of fluid during an exhale, it creates a rattling or gurgling sound.
But to a family member, it sounds like they are drowning. It sounds like they are fighting for air.
It sounds incredibly distressing to the listener, absolutely. But medical literature and observation strongly indicate that the patient, who is usually entirely unresponsive at this stage, is not experiencing any discomfort or sensation of choking.
They don't even feel it.
Right. It is simply air moving over fluid. And hospice teams have medications, anticholinergics, that can help dry up those secretions to make it quieter for the family's sake.
This highlights the most crucial point about the hospice team's communication. The source emphasizes that the staff proactively prepares the family for these exact signs.
They get out in front of it.
Yes. They don't wait for the Cheyne-Stokes breathing to start and then casually mention it. They sit the family down days beforehand and explain the biology we just discussed.
And that proactive education completely changes the psychological reality of the room. Let's analyze the neurobiology of the family members in that moment.
Okay, let's look at the family.
If you are watching your loved one stop breathing for 30 seconds, and you are in a state of medical ignorance, your brain perceives a life-threatening crisis.
You think they are dying right then and there.
Exactly. Your amygdala fires, flooding your system with adrenaline and cortisol. You go into an acute fight-or-flight response.
You're panicked.
You are experiencing real-time trauma because your brain is screaming at you to intervene, to perform CPR, to call 911.
You are operating in an environment of sheer panic.
But if you are watching that exact same 60-second pause in breathing in a state of preparation, because the hospice nurse explained the mechanism of Cheyne-Stokes yesterday, your brain processes the visual information entirely differently.
Because you know what it is.
Yes. There is no adrenaline spike. There is no cortisol flood. Instead of terror, you experience a solemn, inevitable sadness. You remain physiologically calm.
That's amazing.
Reducing this fear through education is not just good customer service. It is a highly calculated clinical intervention. It is designed to dismantle the medical anxiety so the family can focus entirely on love.
That distinction is monumental. The medical anxiety completely steals your ability to be present.
It robs you of those final moments.
If you are frantically staring at a heart rate monitor or, timing the seconds between breaths on your phone, you aren't holding your mother's hand.
You're a distracted monitor.
Exactly. You are whispering memories to her. You are missing the profound intimacy of the actual moment because you are too busy trying to act as an amateur intensive care nurse.
Hospice education gives you the psychological permission to put down the metaphorical stethoscope.
I love that.
It gives you permission to be a witness rather than a rescuer. And maintaining that state of calm presence is what allows the transition to truly remain gentle right up until the end.
But there is a profound shift that happens right at the moment of pronouncement, though. Following the physical decline, the actual moment of death brings a complete transformation to the room.
A very distinct pivot.
The environment shifts immediately from one of medical monitoring, even the relaxed monitoring of hospice, to a space of ceremonial and logistical respect.
The clinical reality formally gives way to this sacred reality.
According to our sources, when the death occurs, a hospice nurse is typically called to officially pronounce it. And here's where it gets really interesting. Unlike the massive clinical machinery of hospital settings, this pronouncement happens in familiar, comforting environments.
Away from the hospital.
Right, we are talking about the individual's own home, their own bedroom, or a dedicated, quiet hospice facility. But legally and logistically, how does that actually work?
It's a common area of confusion.
Most people assume that if someone dies at home, you have to call 911, an ambulance arrives with sirens, police come to investigate, and a county coroner gets involved. How does hospice bypass that entire chaotic legal framework?
It comes down to the legal preparation established when the patient first entered hospice care.
The paperwork is done months ago.
Exactly. When a patient is admitted to home hospice, their terminal diagnosis is documented, and there is usually a do not resuscitate or DNR order put in place.
So everyone is on the same page legally.
Yes. The local emergency services and medical examiners are often preemptively aware, or the hospice agency has the legal authority granted by the attending physician to act on their behalf.
Because it's an expected death.
Because the death is entirely expected and documented as the natural progression of a terminal disease, it does not require a forensic investigation.
So the family is explicitly instructed not to call 911.
Correct. Calling 911 triggers an automatic emergency protocol that paramedics are legally bound to follow.
And that means resuscitation.
Yes, which often includes aggressive resuscitation attempts, even if it goes against the family's ultimate wishes. Instead, the family is instructed to call the 247 hospice triage number.
Okay, and then what happens?
A registered nurse, who is legally authorized in most jurisdictions to pronounce the time of death for an expected hospice patient, simply drives to the house.
That fundamentally changes the entire experience. It allows for what we could call environmental dignity.
Environmental dignity, yes, I love that phrase.
Think about the stark sensory experience of a hospital ICU.
Oh, it's incredibly harsh.
The harsh, relentless fluorescent lights.
Yeah.
The constant alarming beeping of IV pumps down the hall. The smell of industrial antiseptics and bleach.
That's assault on the senses.
It is. The jarring interruption of shift changes and overhead PA announcements. A hospital is a machine meticulously designed to fight death. It is an arena of active combat.
That's a perfect description.
When someone passes away in that arena, the environment itself contributes heavily to the trauma of the survivors. It feels chaotic. It doesn't feel like a place designed for an ending. It feels like an abruptly interrupted medical process.
Now contrast that combat arena with the concept of environmental dignity at home. Imagine passing away in the bed you have slept in for 30 years.
Such a huge difference.
The lighting in the room is soft, perhaps just the warm glow of a bedside lamp. The acoustic environment consists of the quiet sounds of your own neighborhood, or maybe a curated playlist of your favorite music playing softly in the background.
The sensory details matter so much.
They really do. The smells are intimately familiar, your own laundry detergent, the scent of the rain outside the window, maybe the smell of your beloved dog who's allowed to be curled up right there at the foot of the bed.
You definitely cannot have a golden retriever sleeping on the bed in an ICU.
You absolutely cannot. And that sensory familiarity fundamentally alters the permanent memory of the death for the surviving family members.
How they remember that final day.
Exactly. When they look back on that specific Tuesday years later, the visual and sensory memory is not of tangled plastic tubes, glaring monitors, and frantic doctors.
It's peaceful.
The memory is of a peaceful room, of soft quilts, and of absolute quiet dignity. And when the nurse arrives to make the official pronouncement, they do not rush in with a defibrillator.
They just walk in calmly.
They arrive calmly. They listen for a heartbeat with a stethoscope gently. They respectfully note the time.
They don't immediately usher the family out of the room.
No, not at all. They often step back into the hallway and give the family as much time as they need to sit with the body, to cry, to pray, to wash their loved one, if that is part of their cultural or religious tradition. The environment remains a sanctuary.
But then, inevitably, the crushing reality of the outside world intrudes. Because once that peaceful environment has been established and the passing is officially pronounced, the profound, blinding grief of the family is almost immediately met with the jarring reality of administrative and logistical tasks.
The paperwork of death.
Exactly. I've always found this part of the process astonishing. How does a family practically process doing paperwork like figuring out death certificates or making phone calls to funeral homes minutes or hours after losing someone?
It's almost impossible to ask of them.
It feels like asking a person to sit down and do their complex tax returns immediately after surviving a violent car crash.
It is a phenomenal psychological and cognitive burden. When a human being is in the acute, blinding phase of fresh grief, the brain's executive function practically evaporates.
You just can't think straight.
You can't. Your ability to logically plan, to organize sequential tasks, to make coherent phone calls, or to even remember your own social security number plummets. You are existing in a state of profound cognitive overload.
So if a family were left on their own?
If a family were left entirely alone in that moment, the transition from the sanctuary, the bedroom, to the logistical reality of funeral arrangements would devolve into a nightmare of frantic Googling, panicked decision-making, and immense vulnerability.
This is where the source text highlights the concept of seamless handoffs. How exactly does the hospice team act as an emotional buffer between the grieving family and the bureaucracy of death?
They act as specialized project managers for the worst day of your life.
Project managers. I like that.
Once the death is pronounced, the hospice nurse does not simply pack up their medical bag and leave the family to figure it out. They provide immediate structured guidance.
So they stay and help.
Yes, if the family has made prearrangements, the nurse will personally make the phone call to the chosen funeral provider to arrange for the transport of the body.
Oh, wow. So the family never actually has to pick up the phone and dial a mortuary while they are weeping.
Exactly. The hospice team absorbs that specific logistical shock. If there are no prearrangements, they sit with the family, provide a list of local options, and guide them through the selection process based on their budget and cultural needs.
They hold their hand through the whole process.
Furthermore, they guide the family through the necessary documentation. The source explicitly mentions the death certificate. Legally, a death certificate requires a significant amount of demographic data.
Like what kind of data?
Things like parents' names, birthplaces, highest level of education, occupation.
It sounds so incredibly cold and bureaucratic, just a certificate to be filed away.
It can feel that way,
Yeah.
but the mechanism of how hospice staff gathers this information transforms it.
How so?
They don't just hand the grieving spouse a sterile clipboard and a pen. They sit down at the kitchen table, pour a cup of coffee, and gently guide a conversation.
Make it a human interaction.
Yes. They ask, tell me about where he was born. What did he do for a living that he loved? They gather the cold legal details through the warmth of storytelling.
Oh, that's beautiful.
They transform a bureaucratic requirement into the first act of documenting the person's legacy.
That feels like a monumental act of practical compassion. They are doing the heavy logistical labor so the family is granted the absolute permission to remain in their grief.
Precisely.
They don't have to abruptly switch gears into crisis management mode.
This raises an important question about how we historically view these tasks. In the hospice framework, filling out the demographic forms or coordinating with the transport team isn't an interruption of the medical care. It is the natural continuation of it.
Because caring for the patient now means caring for the family.
Exactly. The seamlessness of this handoff is precisely what protects the family from unnecessary secondary trauma in those incredibly vulnerable first few hours.
And speaking of documenting legacy, that brings us to the next massive phase of this journey. We've covered the shift in medical philosophy, the detailed biology of the physical transition, and the immediate logistical handoffs.
We're moving out of the house now.
Right. Now the focus shifts entirely away from the physical body. It shifts to how the life lived is summarized, publicly celebrated, and permanently remembered.
The memorialization phase.
This is where the source material introduces resources like the funeral program site.
The profound transition from the private reality of death within the home to the public acknowledgement of a life within the community.
According to the text, families generally choose between traditional formal funerals, more modern celebrations of life, or intimate private gatherings.
Depending on what fits the person.
Right. But what I found particularly compelling is how the text highlights the evolution of the artifacts we use to remember people.
The physical things we hold on to.
Yes, the funeral program site is highlighted as a specific resource offering highly customizable templates for funeral programs, memorial prayer cards, and tribute materials.
making it personal.
The emphasis is placed heavily on reflecting the individual's actual nuanced personality rather than just filling out a standard form.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we need to look at the historical context of mourning and why we need these physical artifacts in the first place.
Why do we need them?
Well, human beings have always possessed a deep psychological need for the tangible when navigating loss.
Something to hold.
Exactly. In the Victorian era, mourning culture was intensely physical. Families would weave intricate jewelry out of the deceased's hair.
Oh, wow, hair jewelry.
Yes, they wore heavy black mourning attire and armbands for highly specific, socially mandated periods of time. They took post-mortem photographs. They needed physical proof of the loss to anchor their complex emotions.
We don't weave hair into lockets anymore, thankfully, but that core psychological need to hold something tangible hasn't disappeared.
Not at all. Today, that need manifests in the memorial cards and the printed programs.
Right.
When you attend a service, being handed a beautifully designed, high-quality program, something you can physically hold in your hands, something you can slide into the frame of a mirror at home or tuck into a scrapbook, provides that necessary tangible anchor.
It's physical evidence that they were here.
It is physical evidence of the person's existence and the community's gathering to honor them.
And that is why the customizable templates mentioned in the source are so vital. It is about reclaiming the narrative of the person's life.
Telling their specific story.
For decades, funeral materials were heavily monopolized by the funeral homes themselves, resulting in incredibly stark, cookie-cutter, black-and-white documents that felt completely disconnected from who the person actually was.
Very generic.
They were functional, but they lacked soul. If your grandfather was a vibrant, hilarious man who loved bright Hawaiian shirts and restoring vintage cars, handing out a solemn, Gothic-looking program with a stock photo of a dove on it, it feels almost like a disservice to his unique memory.
It completely misses who he was.
Utilizing resources that allow families to deeply customize the tribute means the memorial becomes a true reflection of their personality. You are telling their highly specific story, not just a generic, easily digestible story of someone who died.
What's fascinating here is the democratization of memorialization.
The democratization, what do you mean by that?
Because of intuitive templates and online printing resources, a family doesn't need to hire an expensive graphic designer or rely on the limited stock options of a mortuary to create a beautiful, fitting tribute.
They can do it themselves.
Exactly. They have creative control over the final presentation of their loved one's story. But the source material also points to a massive expansion beyond the physical paper, the digital footprint.
Oh, yes. Digital memorials.
We're seeing a major shift toward memorial websites, interactive online guest books, and digital archives of memories.
This is where the intersection of tradition and technology gets really complex. Because to some older generations, a digital guest book might feel ephemeral or less real than a heavy, leather-bound book sitting on a podium at a church service.
It definitely changes the physical boundaries of grief.
How so?
A leather-bound guest book at a funeral home is strictly limited by geography, logistics, and time. Only the people who possess the physical ability, the financial means, and the time off work to travel to that specific room on that specific Tuesday afternoon can sign it.
It's a very exclusive record when you think about it.
Very. The memories captured are limited to the people in the room, but a digital memorial creates an expansive, utterly borderless community of mourning.
So anyone, anywhere can participate.
Yes. A college roommate living across the country, a former coworker stationed overseas, a childhood friend who hasn't seen the deceased in 30 years. They can all contribute deeply personal photos, anecdotes, and stories that the immediate family might never have seen or heard.
That is a staggering shift in how we gather history. You are essentially crowdsourcing their legacy.
A crowdsourcing legacy, absolutely.
You are gathering the fragmented pieces of their personality that lived entirely in other people's memories and assembling them in one place.
It creates a significantly richer, more multidimensional tapestry of the person's life.
And
crucially, as the text notes, it creates a lasting tribute that can be revisited over time.
because it stays online.
Right. The physical funeral service happens exactly once. It is over in 2 hours. The digital memorial, however, exists perpetually.
It's always there.
When the grieving daughter is feeling the acute sting of loss 6 months later, at 2 a.m., she can log on to that site. She can read the specific words of comfort left by her mother's friends. She can scroll through a timeline of photos.
It's a sanctuary you can visit whenever you need to.
The digital platform becomes a persistent, accessible sanctuary for remembrance that doesn't close its doors at 5:00 p.m.
So, What does this all mean? When we step back and look at the entire massive picture we've painted today, from the initial philosophical shift to comfort care, through the deep biological changes of the physical passing, the seamless logistical handoffs to the funeral directors, and now the creation of these beautiful, deeply customized analog and digital memorials, it brings us to a profound realization about our source material.
It's a huge journey.
It is. We've covered all these intricate steps, but the text makes one final, absolutely vital point that ties the entire philosophy together. The care does not end when the memorial service concludes and the guests go home.
You are referring to the long tail of care.
Yes, the long tail of care.
This is perhaps the single most underappreciated and deeply compassionate aspect of the entire hospice philosophy.
Exactly. The core information here is that grief is not an event. It is a deeply personal, ongoing, and often unpredictable experience.
It's not a straight line.
And hospice care explicitly provides ongoing emotional and spiritual support through structured bereavement programs. We aren't just talking about a polite condolence card mailed a week later.
No, it's much more comprehensive than that.
We are talking about access to clinical counseling, professionally facilitated support groups, and follow-up visits designed specifically to help families cope in a psychologically healthy way.
It's a real clinical intervention.
It synthesizes into this profound core truth. In the hospice medical model, the patient was never just the person who passed away.
Right.
The surviving family is also very explicitly under the umbrella of clinical care.
If we contrast this hospice model with how broader society views grief, we expose a massive, highly damaging disconnect.
Oh, society is terrible at handling grief.
Societally, we expect grieving people to move on with terrifying speed. In the corporate world, you are typically granted perhaps 3 to 5 days of bereavement leave to bury a parent or a spouse.
5 days. That's nothing.
It's absurd. The community support is intense for the first week. The casseroles arrive, the text messages pour in, but by month 2 or 3, society essentially expects you to be over it, or at least to compartmentalize it enough to stop talking about it and return to peak economic productivity.
It is the relentless expectation of a rapid return to normalcy when the person's entire normal has been permanently obliterated.
Precisely. But the timeline of actual psychological grief does not care about corporate PTO policies.
It really doesn't.
Grief doesn't neatly resolve after the custom funeral programs have been handed out and the digital memorial is published. Grief is circular. It comes in unpredictable, crashing waves.
It hits you when you least expect it.
A profound wave of despair could be triggered by a smell in a grocery store, a specific song on the radio, or a holiday 6 months later. Standard Medicare regulations require hospice agencies to provide bereavement support to the family for a minimum of 13 months following the death.
13 months. That is a highly specific number. Why 13?
Because 13 months guarantees that the hospice team is available to support the family through every single first of the hardest year.
Oh, wow. The firsts.
Yes. The first Thanksgiving with an empty chair, the first Christmas, the first birthday without them, and crucially, the first anniversary of the death itself.
That makes so much sense, getting past that 1-year mark.
By including structured follow-up visits and bereavement support groups for over a year, hospice fundamentally validates the long-term reality of loss.
They normalize it.
It is the medical and psychological establishment looking at the family and saying, "We know this isn't over for you. You are not broken for still hurting 8 months later. Your grief is normal, and we are still here to support you."
That ongoing structured safety net is incredible. It proves that the gentle transition we've been unpacking this entire time doesn't just apply to the patient.
No, it applies to everyone involved.
It applies to the family's brutal transition back into a world that no longer contains their loved one. It is a continuum of care that bridges the gap between life, death, and survival.
It absolutely is a continuum. And for the listener, this is really the most vital takeaway of our entire discussion.
What should they take away from this?
If you ever find yourself in this situation, navigating the profound loss of someone under hospice care, utilizing these post-event bereavement resources is not a sign of emotional weakness.
That's not a failure.
It is not an admission that you are somehow failing at the grieving process. It is a built-in foundational feature of the healthcare model you are already enrolled in.
You're supposed to use it.
You are entirely entitled to that care because you survived the storm, And surviving a storm of that magnitude takes a heavy toll on the hull of your own ship.
You don't have to rebuild the ship all by yourself once you finally make it into the harbor. The crew is still there to help you patch the wood and chart a new course.
That's beautifully said.
Which brings us to the summary of today's deep dive. We started with the specific intention of demystifying this highly complex process, of stripping away the fear that comes from medical ignorance.
And we covered a lot of ground doing that.
We did. And what we have found by looking closely at the biological realities, the structure of the multidisciplinary team, and the modern resources for customized memorialization is a system profoundly dedicated to human dignity at every single level.
Dignity is the core of it all.
When guided by proactive education, compassion, respect, and a dedicated team, end-of-life care can offer immense closure. It minimizes the physical suffering of the body, absolutely, but just as importantly, it minimizes the administrative, logistical, and psychological suffering of the surviving family, maximizing peace at every step of the journey.
It systematically transforms an event that is naturally associated with chaos and trauma into an event that can be defined by deep connection, profound care, and lasting legacy.
It changes everything.
It does. But before we conclude, our discussion about the modern shift toward digital memorials and how they persist endlessly long after the physical services are over raises an important question.
Okay, I love leaving the audience with a complex, lingering thought. Let's hear it.
It is something for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about your day. Consider what it actually means for the psychological future of grief, now that our loved ones' digital memorials are permanent, interactive, and globally accessible spaces.
The permanence of the internet.
Right. In all of human history prior to this moment, memories naturally faded with the generations. A great-grandfather became just a name on a census or a single faded photograph.
Just a distant memory.
But will future generations process grief and ancestry entirely differently when they can seamlessly visit a highly detailed, multimedia digital footprint of an ancestor they never actually met?
When they can read their actual words.
Yes. When a teenager in 50 years can read the exact, nuanced words of support left by their great-grandmother's friends, see her custom tributes, and interact with her legacy in real time.
That's wild to think about.
How does the sheer unyielding permanence of the internet, the fact that these digital sanctuary spaces do not erode in the wind and rain like stone monuments in a cemetery, change the very nature of saying goodbye?
Wow.
Are we ever truly saying a final goodbye anymore? Or are we fundamentally changing the medium through which we maintain our relationships with the dead?
Wow. That is an immense amount to chew on.
It's a big question.
Are we changing the medium of the relationship entirely? I think that thought alone could be the subject of its own entire deep dive.
I think we could talk for another hour just on that.
We really could. It really makes you appreciate how tools like customizable templates and online memorial sites aren't just modern administrative conveniences. They are literally building the interactive archives of the future.
They're building history.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this incredibly intricate, emotionally weighty journey today.
Thank you so much for listening.
We know it wasn't a light topic, but we hope this comprehensive roadmap helps you navigate your own safe harbors when the time inevitably comes. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep learning about the science of life, and as always, thank you for diving deep with us.